We have just one more episode before Amazon's Lord of the Rings Rings of Power Season 2 ends, and there is a lot to unpack from this episode that just dropped. Hello there, everyone. We're back with yet another round of theories and predictions for the upcoming season finale of Rings of Power Season 2. It's time to pull out our Palantir for one last time this year as we try to scurry into the future. As predicted, Elrond arrives at Khazad-dûm to seek the dwarves' help, while Disa and Prince Durin rally their people against their father's madness and enlist them to help Eragion. We also foresaw that despite Durin's rousing speech, the dwarves would ultimately not turn up to help the elves during the siege. Celebrimbor descends into madness completely as we foresaw, and he comes to his senses only at the very end when everything is lost. Finally realizing too late that he has been deceived, the 9 rings are created, and as predicted, Myrddania loses her life, though not under the circumstances we had foreseen. Galadriel is freed thanks to Elrond as they resolve their differences just like we said they would. We had predicted during one of our previous videos that not all of the characters from Elrond's company would make it back alive, and Rhiann falls to orc arrows. The Númenóreans, along with the Harfoots and the Stranger, were all missing from this episode, with the siege of Númenor drawing to an end. The next episode will most likely focus on tying up the plot points for these aforementioned characters. We have a host of predictions lined up on what will most likely happen there. Stay tuned to find out, as you will surely want to experience what spicy endings we believe Amazon has planned for next week's episode. So without wasting any more time, let's dive into Amazon's Rings of Power one last time as the forces of good and evil clash for supremacy while the fate of Middle-earth hangs in the balance. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means an awful lot. Thank you, and let's begin.
I need the mine. Take him back. Now.
King Durin is killed by the Balrog as it finally emerges and begins its rampage. We will be shown the reason why the dwarves did not turn up to save the day in the Battle of Eragion. This will be because the Balrog will have finally awoken as the king, seeing his people forsake him, will start digging alone, guided by his ring. King Durin will have dug too deep and too greedily, finally unleashing the demon of flame and shadow into his realm. Seeing the Balrog appear, Prince Durin and the others will have no choice but to abandon their promise to help Elrond and the elves of Eragion. The Balrog will slay the old king, thereby earning its legendary nickname, Durin's Bane. This is going to be one of the most hyped moments in the entire series, as this is the same Balrog that we see in the Fellowship of the Ring movies hounding Frodo and company. Even though the Balrog for this show is awakening at least a couple of generations earlier than in the source material, it seems destined to wreak the same havoc and mayhem. We cannot wait for episode 8 to see this fearsome monster in action.
9 rings to enslave the world.
Sauron sets out to pursue Galadriel, who has the fake 9 rings. Sauron will pursue Galadriel after he learns from Celebrimbor that she has the final 9 rings. He will catch up to her and the two will duel against each other, with Sauron coming out on top. The deceiver will then realize that he was deceived by Celebrimbor, as the Lord of Eragion had played this elaborate ruse to buy time, not for Galadriel to escape with the 9 rings, but for him to destroy them. With the orcs pouring into the city, he has little to no time to do so. The series will end with Celebrimbor throwing the rings into the furnace to unmake them, despite knowing, just like the One Ring, they too are cool to the touch, as he finds out in episode 7. We will likely not see whether he succeeds in doing so or not. We will also not get to see Celebrimbor turned into a banner by Sauron, as he does in the books, thankfully. With many orcs dead and Sauron having slipped from their grasp, we will begin to see them grow increasingly disillusioned with Adar's leadership. We have already seen how one of Adar's lieutenants has begun doubting Adar's leadership. In the aftermath of the siege of Eragion, with so many orc lives lost along with his questionable decision to release the troll, many of his children will begin questioning him. They will begin to question whether Adar is truly motivated to kill Sauron in order to save them from his tyranny, or replace him as their master. His obsession with the Dark Lord will so consume Adar that for him too the reason for his pursuit will be muddied with a doubt that whether his actions were really for the good of the orcs or to satiate a personal vendetta against Sauron for turning him into an Uruk. Although the end of episode 7 shows the orcs as victorious, the tides will turn one last time in the favor of the elves. With Sauron no longer in Eregion and more than half of the orc army dead, the siege of Eregion will be considered a failure by many orcs. The orcs' storyline will probably end with them still following Adar, but quite clearly their faith in him will be shaken, nicely shaping up the plot lines for Season 3, where he will most likely be betrayed by them and become the foot soldiers of Sauron as usual. Elrond and Gil-galad will be rescued by Celeborn and his forces, with Galadriel's husband finally making an appearance. The showrunners have confirmed in interviews that Celeborn, who is Galadriel's husband and Elrond's father-in-law in the books, will make an appearance in the show at some point. We cannot think of a much better time than now when Gil-galad and Elrond are in dire need of some rescuing. What better than an elven hero long presumed to be dead returning with other survivors at the last minute, even as all hope seems lost and Nenya or the Ring of Water is close to falling into the hands of Adar to rescue the day. We know that Gil-galad's time to die is still a way to come, as he, along with Elendil, needs to lead the last alliance of elves and men during the siege of Barad-dûr. We know that they will be rescued because of this, and while we won't bet our house on it, we will go off on a limb and predict that Celeborn will be the one doing the rescuing. The stranger overcomes the final trail set to him by Tom Bombadil and rescues Poppy and Nori. His name is also revealed to be Gandalf. After having set a task to find his staff, the only hint given to the stranger was that his heart would reveal the truth. The stranger is faced with a serious dilemma as to whether gain his staff of power and pass the supposed trial or forsake it along with the world and go and save Poppy and Nori. We feel like his true trial is not to find his staff but to find what his heart believes to be good and right. Due to this, we predict that the stranger will struggle with indecisiveness and try to figure out what the correct thing to do is. He will, however, eventually choose to save Poppy and Nori's power, and by doing so, he will have passed the true trial having listened to his heart. The stranger will then go and save the Stoors and the Harfoots, just as their settlement is beginning to get razed by the Godrim at the nick of time. The Stoors, having been told by the Harfoots that their companion was like an elf, but much grander, earlier in the season, put 2 and 2 together and named him Gandalf. The name would get everyone's approval and it would stick. Gandalf and the Dark Wizard clash as it is revealed that the latter is indeed one of the 2 blue wizards. Having repelled the Godrim and gotten a name along with his staff, the wizard heads towards the base of the secret cult to face his nemesis. There he is greeted by the Dark Wizard, who tries to tempt him with a promise of power, just as Saruman would one day do in the Third Age. We will most likely get the Dark Wizard's backstory on how he grew tired of helping people whom he considered hopeless and evil by nature, and after giving into despair, decided to rule them instead of guiding them, which was against his original mission. Gandalf, however, won't be tempted as the 2 clash in a great display of magic. While the Dark Wizard will initially have the upper hand, the newly awakened powers of Gandalf will prove to be strong, and the villain will be overwhelmed. The final twist, however, will be that there will be a second Dark Wizard who will be the other fallen blue wizard that will be revealed at the end of this arc.
You truly are the great deceiver.
A desperate Ar-Pharazôn, having seen Sauron in the Palantir, will have his will dominated by the Dark Lord. Númenor won't be destroyed, and Miriel will marry Pharazôn. As this week's episode did not show the Númenorians at all, this prediction of ours from the last video will come to pass next week in the season finale. In the books, Sauron is captured and chained by the Númenorians, just as the Valar had chained and brought his master Morgoth to Valinor for justice. He is brought to Númenor. Great Great indeed was the strength of the men of old, as they had grown powerful enough to even capture one of the Maiar, who were one of the same kind as the Valar, although lesser in stature. Once again, just like Morgoth had sown doubt and malcontent in the heart of the Noldor, Sauron too would feign repentance and begin poisoning the minds of the prideful king Ar-Pharazôn against the Valar and those that worshipped them. He begins stoking the flame in Pharazôn's already prideful heart and eventually leads most of Númenor down the route of corruption. They begin establishing shrines to Morgoth and desecrating the Valar's teachings. The faithful are hunted, and eventually they even attempt to attack Valinor, which results in the destruction of the great nation. As events have already played out differently in the show, the things we just spoke about will probably not come to pass in the same way. In the series, we see Pharazôn catching a glimpse of Sauron when he tries to use the Palantir. The Palantir, as we know, are stones crafted by the great elven smith Fëanor, the grandfather of Celebrimor, during the first age of Middle-earth. While not all of their functions and abilities are known, we know that they can be used to communicate with each other. We feel that at some point, Sauron and Pharazôn will begin establishing communication with each other, and just as Denethor and his will dominated by Sauron in the Lord of the Rings books, Pharazôn will be fed half-truths and lies, which will make him a puppet of Sauron. Through the aid of Sauron's deceit, Pharazôn will lead Númenor on the same path he does in the books, which will eventually lead to the destruction of Númenor. However, it is our prediction that Númenor will not be destroyed this season. With Miriel's redemption taking place in front of the people, there is still a whole season's worth of political intrigues left to play out in the Númenorian plotline. The series for the Númenorians will probably end with Miriel's visions of the destruction of Númenor returning at her moment of triumph, throwing everything into doubt once again. In the books, she marries Pharazôn, and we won't be surprised that she will do so in the series to keep the peace and stop the outbreak of civil war. She might also do this as she falsely believes Pharazôn being king is linked to her calamitous visions stopping, hence she will put him on the throne and herself beside him. Marvelous verdict. The Lord of the Rings Rings of Power Season 2, despite continuing to trample all over the original lore of Tolkien egregiously, has certainly made a worthy case of being a fantasy series worth to watch if taken in isolation. Certainly with the last couple of episodes, with the stakes being high as ever, even if you are in the camp that doesn't like the Rings of Power, you have to admit it does a better than decent job with the portrayal of its characters, such as Annatar and Celebrimor's relationship, Durin and Elrond's friendship, Elendil and Miriel's dynamic, Adar and his orcs bond. These have all been enacted wonderfully. Inaccurate as the show is for the most regarding how it handles the original lore, we feel the Rings of Power will draw many potential fans into the franchise. For us, that in itself makes this season a success if it manages to create more people who fall in love with this wonderful world created by J.R.R. Tolkien. We as fans couldn't be happier. If you're one of this new wave of fans, let us know in the comments and tell us what part of the show got you interested in the Lord of the Rings. We have had to wait about a little more than a year for this show's second season. Something tells us that we won't have to wait as long for the third season. The Rings of Power will most likely break the viewership records for Amazon videos once again, but this time it probably won't be a red herring. There are still lots of room for improvement though, and we do hope Amazon will try and respect the original source material a bit more. We do not want to see things like Elrond kissing Galadriel. She is quite literally his mother-in-law, according to lore, for crying out loud. The showrunners need to stop with this weird obsession they have with attempting to pair Galadriel with the unlikeliest of characters. In the first season, it was Sauron of all people, but this kiss with Elrond really took the cake. The visuals were once again stunning this season, with the Battle of Eragion being a marked improvement over Season 1's Battle of the Southlands. The visuals, although not quite there yet, were far more stunning than the previous season, and it felt a lot closer to the quality of the Peter Jackson films. Now, we at Marvel Studios have been privileged to have you by our side as we journey together this last month through Middle-earth. Once the show is over and if you're craving more Lord of the Rings content, well, we have a number of videos that cover everything related to the franchise. But for now, we have to say goodbye, and we'll see you once again in about, say, a year, hopefully, when the new season drops with more predictions and theories. We will be putting our Palantir into our storage unit along with our tinfoil hats, and until next time, stay safe and stay marvelous, folks. If you like the content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.